Remnant 2 released a few weeks ago, and over those few weeks, I decided to play on Nightmare. Not just play on Nightmare, but start on Nightmare. If you look at the descriptions of the difficulties, it says not recommended for start. But why is that? Well, to put it simply, this recommendation is solely based off of whether you've played a game like this or if you've played the game before. The core differences between the difficulties is basically you hit for less, enemies hit harder. Very simple. Not a bad design for the difficulty considering the type of game that it is and that the enemy's leveled to your character. Usually when a game does this, I get a little concerned because it usually hinders the difficulty severely. To be fair, it is a difficult thing to balance, but it was a balance struck well with Remnant 2. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that it's a Souls-like game. The difficulties feel like it's just kind of preparing you for hardcore mode, and if you don't know what hardcore mode is, it's basically just 0 deaths. If you die, and you restart. After playing my Nightmare run, I decided to re-roll my campaign and also join other players in Veteran difficulty. And the difference was shockingly big. The amount of damage I deal was doubled, roughly. I don't know the exact numbers, that's just what it felt like. And the damage received was half of what I was getting in Nightmare. So after seeing that, I decided to join a player that was about to fight the final boss because that was the most recent boss that I fought and it was the freshest in my mind. On Nightmare difficulty, I was a 1 to 2 shot. On Veteran, 3 to 4. 3 to 4 shot. While teamed up with someone. Why that's significant, I'll get into later, but just keep that in mind. With all that being said, do I feel like the difficulty differences are designed well for the game? Definitely. It's very simple, but it's effective. There have been games that have tried to take this simple approach in the past and completely blundered. First game that comes to mind is The Last of Us. But that's not what this video is about, so that's neither here or there. I feel like this approach is perfect for Remnant 2 because it's a Souls-like game. It doesn't matter what difficulty you're on, if your timing is off, if your response time is bad, if your ability to adapt is terrible, if you're just garbage in general, you're gonna be garbage on any difficulty. Granted, playing on the lighter difficulties will give you a bit more breathing room, but if you can't get the grasp of dodging things, you're still gonna suck. One of the things I greatly appreciate about how they've done difficulty changing during game is the fact that you can't just do it in the middle of gameplay, keep your progression. You have to restart. And by restart, I mean re-roll the campaign. You can't just go up to a boss and be like, oh man, this is too difficult. Let me just lower the difficulty, beat the boss, and then swap it back up and continue the game. No, you have to re-roll the campaign, possibly get completely different maps, and start from the beginning. For the most part. I mean, you still get to keep your character and its progression, but you don't have any world progression or story progression. If you'd rather not lose progression, but you want to progress in experience, progress in scrap, and be able to upgrade things, maybe go get some loot you missed, or maybe an archetype, etc., you could just re-roll an adventure of a specific world so you can get through it again, get the things that you want or need. The game starts you off with one archetype. Eventually you can multi-class, and I would highly recommend that you do that as soon as you can. Once you find the material to do so, there's no drawbacks to it. You get benefits from both classes, abilities from both classes. There's nothing but a net positive from multi-classing. And as I do, whenever I play a game on the hardest difficulty, I only make it harder for myself for some reason. It's not like I go out of my way to do this, it just ends up happening. I went through the entire game with a single archetype. Not once did I go, I should get a second class. That way I can be more effective in the game. I only had that thought when I went to go fight the final boss and kept dying, and I was like, you know what, I should probably do that finally. I wish I did it sooner, but one of the beauties of this game is that you can make mistakes like that, or just decide to make it more difficult for yourself, and be fine. You can still get to the end of the game. You can still beat the game. Might be a little more difficult, but it's still doable because it falls down to just being a skill issue. Now granted, there are mods and weapons that do specific types of damage that will give you some sort of benefit, like the Root are weak against fire, so what are you going to use? Fire. I didn't, but you could. Regardless, it still boils down to whether or not you can dodge. The basic bosses throughout the game are just OP versions of what you've already been fighting, with a little twist in there for the fight to keep it fresh, but I think that's a good design for just basic little bosses as you're progressing through that world. It gives you practice, makes you prepared for what you're about to face for the most part. Each boss feels suitable for the world as far as how they look, how they move, how they attack. It suits the world that it resides. Most bosses were manageable and just took me a reasonable amount of time to overcome. However, there were 3 bosses that I ended up struggling with, some of which I struggled more than I did in any other Souls-like game. More than fighting Radon before the nerf and then rebuff in Elden Ring, fighting him 40 levels too early. Also only doing a dexterity build in Elden Ring, which is apparently the hardest build you could play that game as, because magic is kind of broken in that one. But anyway, Shahala? The world boss for Narud, whatever it's called, the giant fetus in the orb when you walk into the room. That was the first world boss and probably one of the more challenging the most challenging world boss out of all the worlds. The root aside, the very final area, that doesn't count. That's a whole beast in and of itself. But out of the rest of the world bosses, I think the Narud world boss was the most difficult. It has such a massive variety of attacks. So many things that you have to pay attention to, memorize, and be able to dodge. It was definitely a reality check for boss fights because I had to make sure my timing and my paying attention of sound and visual cues were on point, especially on Nightmare where I was really easy to kill. So a lot of that's probably due to the fact that I'm on Nightmare and not Veteran. Annihilation was one of the other world bosses I got stuck on, but like I said, the final area is kind of a beast of its own. There were so many sound cues, visual cues, and memorization of moves that you have to make sure that you dodge all of them, because in the first chunk of the fight, you have to be on point with dodging everything if you want to make sure that you actually survive to the end. And then it glitches you into the final form boss fight, which that was jarring, because then I had to memorize a bunch of more moves, and if I died, then I have to do the first chunk of the fight again to get to the second chunk. Oh, but wait, there's more. It glitches you back to the first chunk of the fight, and you better remember what the hell it was fucking doing, because if you don't, you're gonna get blasted by whatever it was. Good boss fight though. Very good design. No complaints, except for the fact that it glitched into the wall and I couldn't see the animation of it about to do a fucking shockwave. The most irritating boss fight I came across was this guy. This guy was so irritating. I tried doing multiplayer with people on this boss fight, right? And every single time someone would join in, or multiple people would join in, and they would go down over and over and over, and then they would die multiple times. And after about their 3rd to 5th death, they'd just leave. No one committed. No one. And we'll get into multiplayer in a bit, but it is much more difficult than playing by yourself. But why was this boss so annoying? Probably because it spammed a bunch of moves. A lot of his moves are AoEs. A lot of those AoE moves melt your health to nothing in like less than a second. And then it does this move where he throws his weapon at you. Hits the ground. You have to dodge that. Flies in, grabs the weapon, goes to slam into the ground. But is it the slam that hurts you? Or would you think it's the shockwave that hurts you? Most would think the fucking shockwave would do damage. But no. No, the devs decided that the impact would do it, but they would give it a shockwave animation, making you think you have to dodge the shockwave, which you've had to do for multiple boss fights, Annihilation, for example. That's a great example of how there's a difference between impact damage and shockwave damage. They know the difference, but for whatever reason they decided to have impact damage on a shockwave animation. So you dodge the impact, you're fine. What's the shockwave do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. It's genuinely the only flaw in a boss fight that I ran into throughout my entire playthrough. Don't put in deceptive animations when you give us a rule of thumb to follow in a Souls-like game where it's solely dependent on you dodging attacks. Other than that, sound cues and visuals were great as far as boss fights. That was like the only and biggest gripe I had. I mentioned multiplayer and how it's more difficult to play with other people than it is to play by yourself. And that's because they scale the enemies to how many people are in your group. Now, if you have an organized group, you're all in a Discord call or whatever, then it should be fine. You guys can coordinate what classes you're doing. Someone could be a tank, a healer, and DPS, so on and so forth. If you have that, you should be fine. But then if you're trying to play with randoms that clearly just aren't focused on doing group gameplay, and they come in and decide to do nothing but melee damage against the boss, and then get downed over and over and over, or they just simply can't dodge worth a damn if their life depended on it, and they go down over and over and over. I just had a terrible experience playing with people. The multiplayer experience for this game is great. How easy it is to get with a group of people is great. If only people were better at playing as a group or the game in general, then it might be a better experience. When I say things scale to how many people are in the group, it basically does more damage, and some of the attacks can vary a bit because of how many people are in there. Like, for example, Annihilation, the boss will slam the ground, drag the sword, and then these orbs will appear, and if you're by yourself, two of the orbs are tethered to one another, so if you destroy one, it destroys the other. If one more person joins in, they are no longer tethered. So there's multiple orbs. I was too distracted by trying to shoot things that keep count, but it was like 6 or 8 orbs, and they're all separate, so you have to make sure you shoot all of them separately. Things will hit you harder, naturally, and it will take more damage. Because people can't be really all that reliable in multiplayer, it is personally, in my opinion, a lot easier to play by yourself to get through the game, because you only have to worry about you and yourself being able to dodge the boss's attacks, and the boss is solely focused on you. I do think this game would benefit greatly from some sort of like voice chat or something. Granted, you could message another person through Steam or whatever console you're on and see if they want to like get into a call or something while you guys play. But me personally, I ignore 99% of my Steam messages, so not really a viable option for me. I just think voice chat would be fantastic. But as comes with voice chat comes toxicity.
No toxic pussy. Dude, don't make me come to your house and suck your fucking dick!
And with a game that's like heavily ragey, could be a recipe for disaster, so I can see why they didn't put it in, but I would still like it to be in there, especially if you're someone like me that doesn't have any friends. As for the world design, I felt like the world design was done very well. No world, level, whatever you want to call it, looked like the other one. There was ample variety in enemies, and because it's randomly generated as far as like order of things, map tiles, and dungeons, it's a fresh experience most of the time when you re-roll an area. I think the only complaint that I've seen people say, which I disagree with, is the fact that Nerud is such a vast open wasteland, and you're just wandering aimlessly to find things. Have you ever played an open world game? Did you play Elden Ring? Of course it's like that. Elden Ring has ample places where it doesn't serve a purpose, but you still explore to maybe find some materials or see what's over there. You're exploring. To be fair though, like the other maps are basically just dungeons with dungeons inside them, whereas Nerud is more open world with dungeons within it. So I can see why some people might complain because they like the fact of how the other worlds are formatted. But personally, I still found Nerud to be like my favorite world in the game. Now on to loot and the archetypes, which can be kind of difficult for some to find. Like for example, the archetype that you have to find in Nerud is out in the poisonous storm thing that's off the map. I still haven't found it, but I still haven't really tried. Loot can be discovered. The gear, that being weapons, armor, the absurd plethora of fucking rings in the game, archetypes, all of that can be discovered, as well as like traits. Depending on your actions in certain situations, you can unlock traits. You can find gear or loot by just suffering through some guy droning on about the history of his area. Killing bosses, you can get things to make new weapons or mods for your weapons. It's a very simple loot system, and I think it's appropriately done for the kind of game that it is. However, why so many rings? Why? Why not just maybe put some armor on some of these effects on armor? Make armor have a more of a purpose other than just like slowing down your mobility and giving you a little more buffer as far as damage goes. But no. They give us like 100 rings we have to sift through to only select 4 to figure out whether or not that would be suitable for our build. And after a certain point, it just kind of became arbitrary. Like I just stopped caring about the rings altogether. I stopped getting excited for the rings because there were so many of them. I saw a little purple glowy thing on the ground. I'm like, oh, sweet loot. That's probably another ring. Yay, just what I wanted. Albeit there are some pretty strong rings with good effects on them, but personally I just stopped caring. It didn't really matter at the end. That's not the only thing that was arbitrary loot in my opinion. The fragments or whatever the hell they are that you could use to upgrade your relic to give you certain buffs like reload speed or stamina or damage, etc. Those felt arbitrary too, and I stopped caring about them after the first world. I don't think I even finished my first world before I stopped caring about those. I stopped messing with them altogether for the rest of my playthrough. Made it out just fine. I'm sure they give you some sort of perk or benefit to be able to better your build, because they do. It just felt tedious and cumbersome, just as the rings did. Like I said, I unlocked my second archetype at the end of the game. Not ideal. Do not recommend doing that. But the cool thing about unlocking archetypes is that you automatically get that archetype when you go to start a new game. For example, the summoner archetype, the gear that comes with it, that's all stuff that you have to unlock and pay for when you discover it playing through on your initial character. When you start a new character as a summoner, you get all the armor and weapons that come with the summoner archetype. So you won't have to spend that money to unlock it as you progress into the game, which I thought was kind of nice. The leveling in this game is pretty short and sweet. You level up your archetypes. Max level is like level 10, so you have 2 archetypes you can level up to level 10, and then you have traits. Some say the trait system's a complicated system. To that, I think they're delusional. I think it's ridiculous to say something like that is complicated. Look at the Path of Exile skill tree. Now, that's an extreme example, sure, but even Skyrim had a more complicated skill tree than this. It's pretty straightforward. You get 65 trait points total. That's your max, and you distribute them accordingly. You can respec your class. They're specific to being suitable for certain types of builds. It's very simple and well done, in my opinion. You unlock more traits by beating bosses in certain areas, by doing certain things in certain areas, so on and so forth. They're hidden throughout the game. You even get one for beating the final boss. So clearly, they want you to play the game through again, because it's more than likely that you have missed something, that you don't have everything available in the game. As for endgame, is there one? Should there be one? Once you beat the game, you basically have the option of re-rolling adventures of specific worlds, or you could re-roll your campaign altogether and change the difficulty to an easier one or a harder one. You could join other people's games and help them throughout certain sections. And that's about it. So basically go collect the loot that you didn't get before, find the bosses you didn't get to fight before, experience the rest of the game, and just wait for the next DLC. I think that's how it should be. Not every game needs some sort of end game content. You played the game, you beat it. What more do you want? Especially considering the game's like $50. We'll be getting 3 DLCs within a year of the game being released, so if their track record's anything to go off by, we should see the first DLC no later than March, possibly even before then, maybe by the turn of the year, somewhere around there. That's about what I would expect, but I could be wrong. The sound design for this game, there's a good and there's bad. Most of it is pretty good. I mean, the sound cues for when you're doing fights and whatnot, they're vital for this sort of game, and I think they've done really well with it. Where they have blundered completely, however, is when you go to shoot an enemy, for example in Naruto when you're fighting the robots, you shoot the enemy and suddenly you hear that whining sound that the robots make coming from every which fucking direction, but there's actually nothing there, and there's only the enemies that you've been looking at shooting. Don't make deceptive sound cues. Another game that's done this is Dying Light. Up to the first time that you go out at night, it feels pretty scary. All the sounds do the effects that they're supposed to, and you're on edge the entire time. Then after you've played the game for a bit, you realize most of these sounds mean absolutely nothing, which kind of takes away from the game, in my opinion. Make me scared, but make what's making me scared have purpose, otherwise I won't be scared. Same with Remnant. You know? Make the sounds make me aware of what's around me, not deceive what is actually around me. One of my biggest pet peeves in a game, most of the dialogue in this game is okay. Voice acting is decent. It feels like a AA game. Not a whole lot of budget, but what they've done has been done effectively. One of the things that annoyed the absolute shit out of me was the nonsense, lack of substance, random dialogue your person wanted to make as you're going through the game. They just love hearing themselves talk. Oh, is it finally over? It's never over, bitch. Shut up. I don't want to hear it. Stop talking. So annoying. And your character talks so frequently too. Don't make my character annoying, please. As far as bugs in the game, I haven't really come across that many. One of the bugs I've come across, the enemy glitched into the floor. Another one, they phased completely through the floor and fell into the void down below. And then the one I spoke of earlier where the boss glitched into the wall and I couldn't see their animation. That's about it. There hasn't been very many bugs that I've personally come across, but as these things typically go, your mileage may vary. As far as the storytelling goes, it's alright. It gets the job done. Nothing crazy about it. And I did find one plot hole. I don't know if it's because I just didn't find him or what, but what the fuck happened to Ford? I went through the entire game and they're like, oh, you found Clementine. Ford? Fuck him. We don't care about him enough. She's the main plot, so fuck the old guy. But where's Ford? What happened to him? And then the end cinematic, he's shown? I didn't find him. What? Did I miss him? I was very thorough in every world. I went through every single dungeon. Did I just get a bad roll on the worlds that I got and just didn't get the area that he happened to be in? If you know what happened to Ford, let me know, please. All in all, I feel like the game's pretty well done. I mean, you're here for a Souls-like game with good boss fights. It delivers on that. If you're here for story, you get a story that's good enough and it gives you motive to move through. Genuinely though, I feel like it's my favorite Souls-like game right behind Elden Ring. I definitely look forward to the DLCs. I plan on doing an Apocalypse playthrough, and at some point I'll probably stream a hardcore playthrough. Maybe in a lull of when games are coming out. What did you think of the game? Did you like it? What were your complaints? What did you not like about it? As for what I'll be reviewing next, I'll probably be doing Atlas Fallen and then Starfield. I'll be getting Atlas Fallen probably the same week this video comes out, so be sure to keep an eye out of gameplay and a review of that here in the near future. I appreciate you watching, and I'll catch you next time.